The Young and the Restless spoilers shock. The quiet hum of the hospital corridors had become a kind of constant soundtrack to Nick Newman's restless thoughts. Days had passed since Noah's miraculous awakening, but peace was nowhere to be found. The relief of seeing his son open his eyes had faded quickly, replaced by a gnawing unease that refused to let him rest. Something about the circumstances surrounding the accident didn't sit right: the inconsistencies in the police report, the missing security footage, the silence from witnesses who once claimed they saw nothing. But it wasn't just the crash that haunted Nick. It was Sienna Bacall. He had noticed her the moment she entered the hospital, too composed, too calm, her presence both elegant and unnatural amid the chaos of grief and recovery. Everyone else who came to visit Noah wore their emotions openly, but Sienna's face was an unreadable mask. She introduced herself to the staff as a friend of the family, offered polite condolences to Sharon, and stayed only long enough to leave flowers by Noah's bed. It should have been innocent. It should have ended there. But Nick had learned to recognize when someone was hiding something. That evening, as the lights dimmed and the nurses changed shifts, Nick returned from the cafeteria and froze in the doorway of Noah's room. Through the narrow window, he saw her, Sienna Bacall, dressed in black, standing at his son's bedside, whispering something Nick couldn't hear. Her hand hovered over Noah's bandaged head, not in comfort, but in something that looked eerily ritualistic. Her expression wasn't sorrowful or sympathetic, it was deliberate, focused, as though she were ensuring something stayed buried. Nick's first instinct was to burst into the room, but something told him to wait. He stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, watching through the glass. Sienna leaned closer to Noah's ear, her lips moving quickly, her eyes flickering toward the door every few seconds. Whatever she was saying wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. When she finally turned and left, Nick caught the briefest glimpse of satisfaction in her eyes, the look of a woman who had confirmed that her secret remained safe. From that moment, Nick knew one thing: this woman was not a friend. The next morning, he confronted Sharon about her. Sharon admitted that Sienna's name had come up before, as the owner of a Los Angeles nightclub called Vespers, the same place where Noah had last been seen before the crash. She didn't know the full extent of their connection, but she remembered the police mentioning her during the early investigation. That was enough for Nick. His instincts screamed that Sienna had more to do with Noah's accident than anyone realized. When Noah was strong enough to speak, Nick approached the conversation cautiously. His son still struggled to differentiate memory from hallucination, and too much truth could fracture his already fragile mind. But Noah deserved to know something. Nick told him that the car's brakes had been tampered with, that the accident wasn't an act of fate, but of malice. The color drained from Noah's face, confusion and fear crossing his features as fragments of that night flickered at the edges of his memory. He remembered speeding down the Pacific Coast Highway, the way the wheel had suddenly refused to turn, the sheer panic as the guardrail rushed toward him. But beyond that, nothing. Just darkness. Nick assured him that the person responsible would pay. He didn't say her name, not yet, but in his heart, he already knew. Every instinct, every whisper of intuition pointed toward Sienna Bacall. Over the following days, Nick became consumed. Sleep abandoned him. He followed Sienna through the hospital's hallways, watching her movements like a predator tracking prey. She visited rarely, always at odd hours, slipping past nurses with charm and excuses. Once, Nick trailed her to the parking garage, where she met briefly with a man whose face he couldn't see. Their exchange was quick, hushed, and ended with Sienna pressing an envelope into the man's hand. When she left, Nick retrieved the discarded envelope wrapper from a nearby trash bin. It bore the letterhead of Vespers. That night, Nick did what he had done countless times in his youth as Victor Newman's son: he went hunting for the truth. Using contacts he hadn't spoken to in years, he began digging into Sienna's background. The findings were worse than he imagined. Sienna Bacall wasn't merely a nightclub owner, she was a broker of secrets, someone who specialized in manipulation, blackmail, and discreet cover-ups. Her establishment had been linked to several accidents involving her wealthy clientele, none of which had ever reached trial. And more alarming still, her name appeared alongside Holden Novak and Claire Grace Newman in several business documents tied to shell corporations registered in both California and Nevada. Nick couldn't believe what he was seeing. Holden, the same reckless young man now suspected of tailing Noah's car, and Claire, whose recent behavior had already drawn suspicion, were both connected to Sienna. The three of them weren't just acquaintances. They were partners, or more accurately, co-conspirators. Together, they ran a con network that preyed on wealthy investors, luring them with charm and false ventures, then disappearing with their money once the illusion crumbled. But if Noah had discovered their scheme, if he had tried to expose them, that could explain everything. The next time Sienna came to the hospital, Nick was ready. He followed her from the moment she stepped through the doors, keeping a careful distance. She didn't go to Noah's room immediately. Instead, she slipped into a side hallway leading to the maintenance wing. A route no visitor had any reason to use. Nick waited until she disappeared, then crept after her. What he found confirmed every suspicion. Sienna was on the phone, her voice sharp and low, speaking to someone she clearly trusted. "He's awake," she hissed. "Yes, but he doesn't remember." The treatment worked. "No, he hasn't mentioned anything about Holden or the deal. But Nick's watching me now, he's getting too close." Nick's blood ran cold. Treatment. Not memory loss from trauma, treatment. It meant Noah's amnesia wasn't entirely natural. Someone had tampered with his recovery, perhaps even before he regained consciousness. Sienna's involvement wasn't accidental, it was orchestration. She hadn't just watched the crash happen, she had ordered it. Rage surged through Nick, but he forced himself to remain silent, stepping back before she noticed him. Every instinct screamed to confront her right then, to make her confess, but he needed proof. Bursting in too soon would let her slip away again, as people like her always did. So he kept watching, waiting for the moment she'd lead him to whoever was pulling the strings. Over the following week, Nick uncovered more layers of deception. Hospital records showed that a consultant had been authorized to administer a post-operative drug regimen to Noah during his coma. The name on the file was Claire Grace Newman. The connection was undeniable. She and Sienna were working together. It explained everything: the secrecy, the strange visits, the missing data from Noah's medical chart. The drug, later confirmed by one of Victor's private analysts, was known to induce targeted memory suppression. It didn't just erase trauma, it erased selected events. It became horrifyingly clear: Sienna and her team had deliberately erased Noah's memory of the night of the crash. They had silenced the only witness to their scheme. Nick could no longer stay quiet. Late one night, he followed Sienna again. This time to the rooftop parking structure of a downtown building. There, under the cold glow of city lights, she met with Holden Novak. The reunion was far from warm. Holden's body language was tense, his gestures sharp, his face etched with frustration. Nick stayed hidden behind a nearby pillar, straining to hear. Holden's voice carried through the night air: "You said it was handled. You said he wouldn't wake up." Sienna's tone was pure venom. "He wasn't supposed to. The breaks were just the beginning. You panicked, Holden. You always do. Now clean up your mess before Nick Newman ruins everything." Nick had heard enough. He stepped out of the shadows, his presence catching them both off guard. For a split second, fear flashed in Sienna's eyes before she masked it with her usual composure. Holden's expression turned to panic. Nick's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but lethal. "You tried to kill my son." Sienna didn't flinch. She simply smiled, cold, measured, dangerous. "Careful, Mr. Newman," she said. "You're standing in a world you don't understand." But Nick did understand. He saw it all now: the lies, the manipulation, the illusion of control. Sienna, Holden, and Claire were part of a web that stretched far beyond Los Angeles, far beyond Noah's accident. They were predators, feeding on the powerful, using love and trust as weapons. And they had chosen the wrong family to cross. By the time Victor Newman received the report from his son, he already had his men preparing for what came next. The Newmans had been targeted, and Sienna Bacall had made the fatal mistake of leaving fingerprints on her crime. For now, Noah remained fragile, unaware of the storm gathering outside his hospital window. But Nick stood watch beside him, no longer just a father, but a hunter. And as dawn broke over Genoa City, one truth became clear: the game had changed. Sienna Bacall's empire of deceit was about to crumble, and Nick Newman would be the one to bring it down. The storm outside the hospital had broken hours earlier, but inside Noah Newman's room, the air was still electric, thick with tension, grief, and fury waiting to ignite. The truth had clawed its way into daylight, tearing through the web of lies that had nearly destroyed them all. For days, Nick had gathered evidence, connecting the dots that no one else wanted to see. The tampered brakes, the falsified medical records, the erased surveillance footage, every thread led back to one name. And now, that name stood before them, cloaked in arrogance and defiance. Sienna Bacall. She had returned, not as a visitor or a friend, but as a woman cornered. The facade of charm was gone. Her elegance remained: the dark suit, the perfect hair, the faint scent of perfume that masked something far more sinister, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Noah, pale and unsteady, sat upright in his hospital bed for the first time since the crash. The color had returned to his face, and with it, a growing fire. For days he had tried to remember what had happened: the blurred flashes of headlights, the sensation of the steering wheel locking, the explosion of glass. And then, finally, it all returned. Sienna's voice, her warning disguised as a whisper, her threat veiled as care. She had come to him before the crash, pretending to protect him, when in truth, she was orchestrating his destruction. Now, staring at her, the anger that had been buried beneath pain rose to the surface. His voice was weak but sharp, each word cutting through the sterile air like a blade. He pointed directly at her, his hand trembling but certain. "Confess," he said, his tone trembling with both rage and heartbreak. "Confess to everything you've done. Tell the truth before it's too late. You think silence protects you, but it only buries you deeper." Sienna didn't flinch. She tilted her head, a faint, almost amused smile playing on her lips. The predator in her had returned. "I have nothing to confess," she said softly, almost tenderly. "I didn't hurt you, Noah. I saved you." Those words snapped something in Nick. For weeks, he had kept himself under control, for Sharon, for Noah, for the sake of justice. But Sienna's calm denial, her cold indifference to the suffering she caused, unleashed a fury that could no longer be contained. In an instant, Nick lunged forward. The chair clattered to the floor as he grabbed her by the collar and slammed her against the wall. The room erupted into chaos. Sharon screamed his name, rushing forward, but he didn't hear her. His hands tightened around Sienna's throat, his face inches from hers, every muscle trembling with rage. "You tried to kill my son," he roared, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. "You took his memories, you ruined his life, and you think you can walk away from it?" Sienna gasped, clawing at his wrists, but her expression was still defiant. Even as her breath caught, she managed to choke out a smile. "You have no proof," she rasped. "You're as blind as he is." Nick's grip tightened. He wasn't thinking, only feeling. The months of fear, the sleepless nights, the helplessness of watching Noah hover between life and death, all of it had condensed into this moment of uncontrollable rage. Sharon's voice was faint, distant, a plea drowned out by the pounding of his heartbeat. Behind them, the door burst open. Holden Novak and Claire Grace Newman rushed in, their faces pale with shock. They shouted, their voices overlapping, warnings, pleas, commands. Holden reached for Nick's arm, but Nick swung backward, pushing him away with a strength born of fury. The impact sent Holden stumbling into a tray of medical equipment, metal instruments crashing to the floor in a symphony of panic. Claire, trembling, clutched Sharon's arm, her wide eyes darting between Sienna's face and the monitors that began to wail in protest. "Stop it!" Sharon cried, her voice raw. "Nick, please, you'll kill her." But Nick couldn't stop. The truth was finally here, so close he could almost taste it, and Sienna's smirk, that unrepentant defiance, was gasoline on his fire. "Tell me the truth," he shouted. "You're working with Holden, with Claire, with those people from Vespers, admit it." At the sound of their names, Sienna's gaze flicked toward Holden and Claire, a split-second betrayal that didn't go unnoticed. Nick saw it, the flash of recognition, the unspoken fear, and that was all the confirmation he needed. His theory had been right all along. They were a team, a network built on deceit. Holden's protests, Claire's tears, Sienna's silence, all parts of the same rotten machine that had nearly taken Noah's life. And then, just as quickly as it began, the moment imploded. Noah, weak but determined, struggled to his feet. He ripped the $4 from his arm, the monitors screaming as blood trickled down his wrist. Stumbling forward, he shouted his father's name. The sound, broken, desperate, familiar, cut through Nick's rage like a blade through fog. Nick froze, his hands still gripping Sienna's shoulders. The look on his son's face, terrified, pleading, brought him crashing back to reality. He released her instantly. Sienna collapsed against the wall, gasping for air, clutching her throat. Sharon rushed to her son, catching him before he fell, while Holden grabbed Sienna and pulled her away. For a moment, the room was chaos incarnate, nurses shouting, alarms blaring, the hallway filling with the echo of approaching footsteps. Within seconds, Detective Burrows and 2 officers burst through the door, weapons drawn, commanding everyone to step back. Sharon held her hands up, her voice trembling as she tried to explain. Nick stood frozen, breathing heavily, the adrenaline draining from his body as realization sank in. He looked from Sienna to the detective, the words caught in his throat. "She did this," he said hoarsely. "She's the reason my son almost died." Burrows didn't respond immediately. He glanced between the two of them, the furious father and the bruised, shaken woman, and motioned for the officers to separate them. Sienna, ever the actress, regained her composure within seconds. Her voice trembled at just the right pitch, her eyes glistened with tears that looked almost genuine. "He attacked me," she whispered. "I came to check on Noah, to apologize, and he tried to kill me." Sharon's protest was drowned out by the chaos. Holden wrapped a protective arm around Sienna, his expression unreadable, while Claire stood silently, tears streaming down her face. She knew the truth but couldn't speak it. The guilt was written all over her. As the police began taking statements, Burrows turned to Nick. "You say you have proof," he said. "Then you better show it." Nick reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive, the culmination of weeks of investigation, recordings from the hospital's security system, financial records linking Sienna to Holden and Claire, and, most damning of all, an audio file recovered by Victor's men. It was Sienna's voice, captured from a call the night of the crash. "Make sure the car doesn't survive it," she had said. "And if he does, I have another way to make him forget." The room fell silent. Sienna's composure cracked, her mask slipping for the first time. Holden's grip on her loosened, realization dawning that he had been nothing more than a pawn. Claire stepped forward, trembling, whispering something too soft to hear. But her eyes met Nick's, and in them, he saw the confirmation he'd been searching for. As officers cuffed Sienna, she straightened her spine, her expression once again calm. But this time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, venomous promise. "You think you've won," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this was never about your son. It's much bigger than him. You have no idea what you've started." Nick watched as she was led away, her words echoing like a curse. Sharon clung to him, her hands shaking, while Noah sank back into his bed, exhausted and pale but finally free from the weight of not knowing. Claire turned away, guilt consuming her, and Holden stood alone in the corner, realizing that the empire he thought he controlled had been built on someone else's strings. As the sirens faded into the distance, Nick felt the storm inside him begin to calm. For the first time in months, the truth was out, or at least part of it. But Sienna's final words lingered like a shadow. There was more beneath the surface, another secret waiting to rise. And as dawn crept across the horizon, Nick Newman made himself a silent promise: if this battle wasn't over, then neither was he.